Welcome once again to the Brownstone, Wolfe's sanctuary of logic, orchids, and murder. Do tell us where in the world you're listening from, and don't hesitate to share your thoughts. If you enjoy these cases, consider liking and subscribing. Now then, shall we begin? Nero Wolfe and the Disappearance from the Clockmaker's studio. The telegram arrived 10 minutes after I'd finished my eggs. It had been a quiet Thursday, the kind Wolfe favoured, not out of preference but out of tradition. The kind where orchids were groomed, beer was sipped at designated hours, and the rest of the world was invited, politely and firmly, to go hang. The knock on my door was Fritz's, which meant it wasn't a knock. It was the soft suggestion of knuckles against wood, accompanied by a tray bearing toast, marmalade, and an envelope with my name written in a steady, mechanical hand. Fritz never opened the front door, not in all the years I'd known him, but he knew how to deliver urgency with elegance. I glanced at the envelope, noted the telegram seal, and broke it open. Archie. Urgent. Client insists. Name, Elias Grunfeld. Clockmaker. Will arrive 10:45 sharp. Regards, W. I looked at the wall clock. 10:21. Wolfe's definition of urgent usually meant someone was bleeding money, not blood. But when a client had a German surname and precision timing, it wasn't wise to dawdle. I was already in the front room when the doorbell rang. Fritz appeared from the hallway like a shadow turned three-dimensional. He glanced at me. I nodded. We had our routines. I crossed the rug, checked the door, and opened it. The man standing there looked like he'd been run through an hourglass. Thin shoulders, narrow frame, and a face etched with fine lines, as if time hadn't just passed over him, but stayed for tea. His suit was a stiff charcoal grey, threadbare at the elbows, and he clutched a narrow hat in one hand and a cloth-covered bundle in the other. "Elias Grunfeld?" I asked. He nodded. Yes, He hesitated. "May I come in?" "Right this way." I led him into the front room, closed the door behind us, and gestured to one of the red chairs facing Wolfe's desk. He sat gingerly, like the chair might disagree with him. Wolfe didn't rise, of course. He tilted his head slightly and lowered his gaze toward the man, folding his fingers across the curve of his stomach. "You are prompt." I despised tardiness. "Time," Grunfeld said softly, "is the only thing I've ever had." Wolfe inclined his head a millimetre, as if granting that at least the man had opened well. I took my place at my desk, notepad open, pencil ready. "Proceed," Wolfe said. Grunfeld set his hat on his lap. The cloth bundle remained tightly wrapped in his left hand. "I own a small horology studio," he said. "On East 19th, between 2nd and 3rd. You may not know it." "I do not," Wolfe said. Grunfeld swallowed. "I had an apprentice, Wilton Hennessy, bright boy, careful hands. He worked with me 3 years. 2 nights ago he did not return home. He lived alone. I assumed he'd taken ill, so I waited. Yesterday morning the studio was locked from the inside, but the back latch was unfastened. When I entered, he paused. Wolfe waited. I found the front clock smashed. A French salon piece. Bronze and porcelain, 1890, uninsured. "And Mr. Hennessy?" Wolfe asked. "Gone. Vanished." I raised my eyebrows. Wolfe shifted in his chair, the only sign that he too had perked up. "There was no sign of struggle," Grunfeld continued, "but his coat and wallet were still on the hook. His keys, his repair notes, all undisturbed, except the clock." "Did you contact the police?" Wolfe asked. "Yes. They took a report. A detective came, looked around, asked questions. But there was no blood, no forced entry, just a young man who walked out into the night." "Or was carried," I said. Grunfeld blinked. Yes, perhaps, but I cannot say." Wolfe steepled his fingers. "Why come to me?" Grunfeld hesitated. Then he slowly unwrapped the cloth bundle in his lap. Inside was a brown ledger, the kind used in shops for generations, columns of dates, numbers, and names. It smelled faintly of oil and varnish. "This," he said, "was Wilton's receipt book. He handled all client transactions. Last week we serviced a watch. Expensive. Claimed by a woman, Miss Bellamy. She said it had belonged to her uncle, now deceased, but Wilton, he doubted her." Wolfe opened his eyes a fraction wider. "He doubted the ownership?" Grunfeld nodded. He said the signature on the watch's engraving didn't match the records he'd seen. He asked to examine the receipt from when the watch was first brought in. But then the receipt vanished. From the book? Grunfeld held up the ledger. A few pages had been sliced out near the middle, a clean removal. He pointed to the stubs. There, he said, 3 entries. Gone. Wolfe turned to me. Archie. I rose, stepped forward and took the ledger. The edges where the pages had been removed were so clean they might have been scalpel cut. I flipped back to the most recent entry. April 28th, I read. Repair, pocket watch, initials MB, client Bellamy Claudia, received by WH. And what is your interest in the watch's provenance? Wolfe asked. Grunfeld twisted the cloth nervously in his lap. Miss Bellamy's uncle, Mortimer Bellamy, died recently. No will, but there is dispute over the inheritance. Another woman claims the estate, Pamela Keswick. She has produced a letter, notarized, suggesting she was named heir informally. If the watch can be tied to either woman, it will affect the claim greatly. Wolfe exhaled through his nose. Ah. Grunfeld leaned forward slightly. Wilton intended to authenticate the signature on the watch and perhaps testify. I believe that's why he vanished. Wolfe was silent. The sound of the city filtered through the blinds. Across from me, Grunfeld's knuckles tightened. I will pay your fee, he said. Whatever it may be, I only wish to find him. Wolfe said nothing. I glanced at him. He stared at the man as if weighing a museum exhibit, not with cruelty, but with studied detachment. Then, at last, he spoke. Mr. Grunfeld, you will leave the ledger. Archie will visit your studio this afternoon. If I find nothing to offend me, I may consent to pursue the matter further. Grunfeld rose, nodded, and began wrapping the cloth bundle around his hat again. I opened the front door and saw him out. When I returned, Wolfe was already leaning back in his chair, fingers laced, gaze on the ceiling. A watchmaker's apprentice, he murmured, a vanished receipt, and 2 women contesting the time. He looked at me. Time is not an inheritance, Archie. It is a possession, easily lost. I didn't answer. Instead, I flipped the ledger open again and started counting the hours. I stepped off the trolley at East 19th and turned north toward the row of brownstones nestled between a shuttered tailor and a Polish delicatessen whose window promised pickled herring and hand-cut rye. The city was overcast, the hour somewhere between a proper lunch and an overdue apology. The air smelled of brass and soot. Grunfeld's studio was wedged into a narrow storefront. The sign above the door was carved in wood, hand-painted in gold leaf. Elias Grunfeld, horologist. No second line, no flashy promises. The display window showed a fan of antique pocket watches and a single bronze pendulum swinging gently from a mounted wall clock. The movement had grace. The sign on the door read, "Closed for repairs." I knocked once, waited, then let myself in with the key Grunfeld had pressed into my hand before he left the brownstone. The lock clicked smoothly. The studio was still. Inside, time was everywhere. It breathed through polished glass domes. It whispered behind oak cases. Every second ticked in a dozen registers. I stood at the threshold, letting the atmosphere settle over me, dry oil, lacquer, and dust too old for sweeping. The workbench dominated the far wall. It was clean. Too clean. The sort of clean that either meant the man was meticulous or something had been cleared. I moved toward the shattered French clock. It sat under a bell jar, or what had once been one. The dome had been lifted and set aside. The clock's bronze base lay cracked across the floor, its face spider-webbed. I crouched, picked up a gear no larger than a nickel, and held it to the light. The metal had warped, impact, not age. This wasn't a fall. It had been struck. I rose, dusted off my hands, and turned to the left wall. Coat rack. A grey wool overcoat hung alone. On the shelf below it, a pair of keys, a leather wallet, and a clean folded handkerchief. So Wilton Hennessy had planned to return, or hadn't planned to leave. The wallet was slim. I opened it. Inside, driver's license, $24, a receipt for 2 cups of coffee at a diner 6 blocks over, and a torn paper napkin folded around a stub of pencil. The pencil had a name written in haste, Claudia. A chill crept up between my collar and my neck. I pocketed the napkin and returned the wallet to its place. There was no sign of forced entry, not at the front, not at the small rear door which faced a narrow alley. That one had been bolted, but not locked. I checked the latch. Scratches, fresh, horizontal, the kind that happen when a bolt is thrown in a hurry. I returned to the centre of the room, arms folded. Tick, tick, tick. Behind me, the shop door creaked. I turned. A man in uniform stood in the entry. His coat bore a patrolman's badge and a winter smear of soot across the left sleeve. He looked 35, maybe older if you accounted for his boots. "You Archie Goodwin?" he asked. "I am." "I was told you'd be poking around. Figured I'd stop by. Name's Dugan. I caught the call 2 days ago. Missing guy, no signs of violence, nothing to bag." I nodded. "Wilton Hennessy." "Yeah. Spoke to the boss, Mr. Grunfeld. Seemed stiff but harmless." "You find anything?" Dugan stepped in and shut the door gently behind him. The ticking swallowed us again. "Depends on what you call anything," he said. "No blood, no scuffle. Clocks are lost, sure, but nothing was stolen. The wallet was still there, keys. I figured the guy got jittery and took off." "Without his coat?" Dugan scratched the back of his head. That part didn't sit right. Thought maybe he was threatened or lured. I let that sit a moment. "Anyone see him that night?" Dugan rubbed his jaw. "Yeah, that's why I stopped by. A waitress from the diner down the way, Molly Treen, said she saw him around 8. Said he looked pale, said he stepped outside to meet someone." "Who?" She didn't know the name, just that it was a woman. Red coat, dark gloves, hair pinned up tight. Talked to him in the alley out back. They didn't argue, but she said Wilton looked like he'd swallowed a bad hour. "Did she hear anything?" "No, they were gone quick." I stepped past him and moved toward the back alley door. I opened it, letting in the weak light of early dusk. The alley ran narrow, lined with frost-rimmed trash bins. A fire escape dangled above like a half-unfolded paperclip. No footprints, no discarded notes, just the narrow hush of a back street too empty for comfort. I shut the door. Back inside, Dugan had taken up a lean against the wall. "You know the woman's name?" I asked. He shook his head. "Nope, but the girl from the diner says she saw her again the next day. Walking past the window, just glanced inside, didn't come in." "What time?" "Maybe 11 a.m. I took out my notepad. "Can Molly describe her?" "Sure, she already did. Said she looked expensive." "Eyes?" "Green, maybe." She wasn't sure, but the coat was a dead giveaway. Burgundy wool, wide collar, high buttons. Sounds tailored. "Yep, rich lady slumming it." I tucked the notepad away and gave him a nod. "You got a card?" He handed me one from his coat pocket. I took it, tapped it once against my index finger and slid it inside my wallet. "If I find anything," I said, "you'll hear." Dugan nodded, then paused. "Think the kid's dead?" I looked at the cracked clock face. The hour hand had stopped at 8:10. "I think," I said slowly, "someone didn't want him talking." Dugan left. The door shut behind him with a final professional click. I did another slow turn through the studio. One set of tools remained on the bench, a screwdriver, a loop, and a slim rod etched with size markings. The loop had a smudge across the lens. I picked it up, held it to my eye, and focused on the tiny fragments of porcelain on the bench. There, on one, a faint smear. Not paint, ink. I reached into my coat, pulled out a small magnifier from my pocket kit, and brought it to the smear. Blue-black, fountain ink. Smudged like it had been pressed between two surfaces. Interesting. I scanned the floor, the counter, the trash bin. Nothing to match it. Not yet. I slipped the fragment into an envelope and slid it into my inner coat pocket. Then I returned to the coat rack and eyed the wallet again. No notes. No appointment book. No personal effects. Clean. Too clean. I checked the back of the coat. One of the pockets had a tear at the seam, about 3 inches hand-stitched from the inside. I reached in. My fingers brushed something rigid. I extracted a thin strip of paper folded 4 times. Carefully I unfolded it. It was a stub. Metro North, New Haven Line. Departure time, 3:44 p.m. Date, 3 days ago. Fare, one way. Destination, Westport. I replaced the stub and stepped back. Westport wasn't exactly where you went to vanish, unless you wanted to disappear without dying. I locked the studio behind me and stepped out into the grey. I had a name. I had a coat colour. I had a train ticket and a clock that had stopped the hour someone spoke the wrong truth. It was enough for Wolfe to chew on, and enough for me to keep my hand near my coat pocket. because a woman had come asking for Wilton Hennessy, and something told me she wasn't done. It took me 20 minutes to canvass both sides of East 19th. I spoke to a cobbler, a fishmonger, and a man repairing lamps with fingers stained the colour of old mercury. No one had seen Wilton Hennessy leave the studio. No one had heard glass break. But all three remembered the woman. Red hair, thick coat, one of those smart ones, the cobbler had said. Didn't give her name. She asked when the shop closed, the fishmonger added. Didn't wait for an answer. The lampman just nodded. Pretty, but she didn't smile. I worked my way down the street. Dugan's waitress, Molly Treen, offered the same details. Red coat, green eyes, gloves that didn't match her shoes. Looked like someone who used to be rich, she said, or still pretended she was. I followed the direction she'd walked, asked questions at a florist, a bookstore, and a dry cleaner. It was at the corner cigar stand where I finally got a name. Claudia Bellamy, the vendor said, eyes squinting through the fog of his own match. She used to come round every week. Lives 2 blocks up, 3rd floor above the old hatmaker's. Has a key to the side door. Doesn't like noise. I tipped my hat, flipped a coin for a tin of mints, and headed there. The building had once been proud, a Romanesque number with carved brick lions over the lintel and brass buttons on the entry intercom that hadn't worked since Roosevelt's first term. I climbed 3 flights of narrow stairs to a landing that smelled of varnish, old letters, and lavender. I knocked. The door opened not a second later. She stood framed in soft hallway light, wearing a dark blouse with a row of small pearl buttons and a brooch that wasn't decorative. It was armour. Her hair was auburn, precise, and not recent. The kind of style you kept because it had once been perfect. Yes? Miss Bellamy? Her eyes registered me. A second passed before she answered. Yes. Archie Goodwin. I'm investigating something for Mr. Elias Grunfeld. He mentioned you'd recently brought in a watch. Her eyes flicked past my shoulder as though deciding how far the hallway carried. Come in. The apartment was modest. A studio with high windows and a fireplace with no draught. Books lined one wall. The other held nothing but a mirror and a single painting. A forest in winter, all absence and grey. She gestured to a chair. I sat. I suppose you want to ask about Wilton, she said. You've heard he's missing. I heard that someone broke the French clock. I let her have that. She crossed to a sideboard and returned with a cigarette case. Offered one, then lit her own. You brought in a pocket watch, I said. She nodded. It belonged to my uncle, Mortimer Bellamy. He passed in March. And you brought it to Wilton? I brought it to the shop. He happened to be at the counter. Did he recognize you? She exhaled slowly. I don't believe so. But you used your real name. Yes. I tilted my head. That's unusual in this line of business. Her smile was faint. I don't see the need for games, Mr. Goodwin. Wilton wouldn't accept the job? No. He examined the piece, said he was unable to service it at that time. What reason did he give? He said something about the engraving, that it didn't match their records. I told him it had never been in for service before. Did he believe you? She looked at me, straight on. I don't know, but he was distracted. His mind was elsewhere. Did he seem nervous? Yes, but not because of me. He kept looking past me, toward the back. Did he mention the receipt book? No. Did you return the next day? No. Did you see him again? No. There was no flicker in her voice, not the rise of guilt, not the tension of deception, just absence, and that was worse. Do you still have the watch? I asked. Yes. May I see it? She hesitated, then rose, stepped into a bedroom I couldn't see, and returned with a small velvet pouch. She handed it to me. The pocket watch was gold, not plated, real. The chain had one broken link near the clasp, worn by years of habit. I opened the lid. Inside, on the back of the face, was an engraving. To C.B. M.B. May the hours serve you kindly. The script was slanted, ornate, and etched with care. I examined the hinge. A faint scratch marked the bottom edge, recent. Was this your uncle's handwriting? I asked. Yes. Who is C.B.? Her eyes narrowed. Myself. Mortimer gifted it to you? She inhaled through her cigarette. He left it with me, along with a letter. Do you still have it? I burned it. It wasn't kind. I didn't move. Mr. Goodwin, she said, tone shifting just slightly, do you believe I'm lying? I believe people say what they think will be understood. She nodded. A useful skill. I handed back the watch. If we need to verify the engraving, would you object? Her lips parted, just briefly. Then, I would expect it. I rose. She stood as well. One more thing, I said. Do you know Pamela Keswick? This time the hesitation was visible. I've heard the name. She claims to be Mortimer's ward. Many people make claims. Did you know her personally? No. Did Mortimer mention her? He mentioned many people, few kindly. I studied her a second longer. She returned my gaze with a softness that could have passed for warmth in a darker room. Thank you for your time. I turned, reached the door, and opened it. As I stepped into the hallway, she spoke once more. Mr. Goodwin? Yes? If Wilton is found, tell him the watch was never about money. I nodded once, then closed the door behind me. Back on the street, I took out my notebook and wrote 2 lines. Claudia Bellamy, calm, too calm. Watch engraving possibly false. No physical receipt confirmed. I hailed a cab and sat back in the seat as the city moved past like a wound clock. Wolfe wouldn't like her, which meant she might be useful. By the time I stepped back into the brownstone, the sun had slipped behind the rooftops and the hall smelled faintly of orange peel and cloves. Fritz's quiet touch on an otherwise colourless winter evening. I hung up my coat, slid my notebook into the drawer, and followed the sound of Wolfe's voice through the office door. And yet, he was saying, you have not brought it. Elias Grunfeld sat perched in the red chair to Wolfe's left, looking like he'd aged 5 years in the 24 since we'd seen him. His collar was crooked, one cuff unbuttoned. On his lap, wrapped in a square of linen, rested the ledger. He hadn't handed it over. I did not want to cause trouble, he said quietly. The boy is missing. That is enough. It is not, Wolfe said. The boy is missing under circumstances which render the distinction between loss and concealment tenuous. The book, please. Grunfeld hesitated. Then, with a resigned motion, he placed the cloth bundle on Wolfe's desk and slid it forward. Wolfe didn't touch it. Archie. I stepped forward, unwrapped the linen, and opened the ledger across Wolfe's blotter. It was the same book I'd examined 2 days prior. Brown spine, reinforced corners, faint smell of brass polish. The pages were numbered in pencil at the top right, neatly, in Wilton Hennessy's hand. Each line carried a transaction, date, item, name, fee, and status, until it didn't. Page 46 ended midweek. Page 47 was missing. So were pages 48, 49, and 50. The cut was clean, razor sharp with the slightest upward angle, consistent with a single deliberate slice. Wolfe exhaled. I kept flipping. Page 51 resumed a week later. A pair of clock adjustments, one mainspring replacement, a wristwatch clasp soldered, and then... Here, I said. I turned the ledger so Wolfe could see. Entry dated 5 days ago. Repair, pocket watch, initials MB. Client name, Clara Bell. Wolfe lifted one eyebrow. Clara. Not Claudia, I said. Bell, not Bellamy. Grunfeld blinked rapidly. That was not entered by me. It was entered by Wilton? Wolfe asked. Yes, I believe so. It's his hand. I traced the next entry. Same day, winding adjustment, desk model, but no technician listed. The only signature is a dash. A week's worth of transactions, Wolfe said, excised, removed, and the one we do have has been renamed. Grunfeld wrung his hands. I had no reason to suspect. I mean, if Wilton changed the entry, perhaps he meant to be discreet. Why, Wolfe said. The receipt book is for record, not discretion. I pointed at the note margin. Wilton's usual entries had a 3-letter code, BCK, MVS, or WRK, but next to Clara Bell was only 1 letter, a small R faintly overwritten. Do you know what that means? I asked. No, Grunfeld said. It looks like he started writing something, then changed his mind. Wolfe leaned back in his chair and clasped his hands over his midsection. The ledger sat open before him like a wound waiting to clot. "Mr. Grunfeld," he said, "you asserted that you do not know who removed these pages." "That is correct." "Do you lock your studio?" "Yes, both doors." "And yet, Wilton disappeared. A woman appeared. The ledger was altered." Grunfeld nodded miserably. "Was Claudia Bellamy ever a client before this?" "No." "Was Mortimer Bellamy?" "No." "Pamela Keswick?" "I've never heard of her." "Do you maintain a second copy of this ledger?" "No, only this one." Wolfe tapped the corner of the book once. "Then you understand the significance of its mutilation." "I do now." Wolfe turned to me. "Archie, the train stub?" I pulled the Metro North ticket from my coat and laid it beside the ledger. "Westport," Wolfe murmured. 3 days before the visit from Miss Bellamy, a one-way ticket, and no return. He looked back at Grunfeld. "Did Wilton have family in Connecticut?" "No, he grew up in the Bronx." "Friends? Acquaintances?" "He kept to himself." "Was he romantic with anyone?" Grunfeld hesitated. "Not that I knew." "Did he ever express concern over a client?" "No." "Did he ever question your judgment?" "No." "Did he ever express doubt about a transaction?" Grunfeld opened his mouth, then shut it. Wolfe's voice did not rise, but it acquired a chill. "Mr. Grunfeld?" Grunfeld's fingers twitched. 3 weeks ago, he said, he returned a customer's watch and asked whether we should be verifying the signature on the internal inscription. "Why?" "He said the engraving style felt inconsistent with the year. I told him we weren't an authentication service. We were a repair shop. He said that didn't absolve us if we were used to launder a false claim." "What was the watch?" I don't remember." "Was it the Bellamy piece?" Grunfeld looked down. "Possibly." Wolfe tilted his head. "Mr. Grunfeld, a week of entries has been excised from your ledger. That is not done to preserve anonymity. It is done to obscure. Someone wished to remove a record, and someone else wished to retain a version of it under false identification. That connotes intent, and when a man vanishes in proximity to that intent, it is no longer a disappearance." He gestured at the ledger. "It is a crime." Grunfeld sat very still. "Will you assist us, Mr. Grunfeld?" "Yes." "Fully?" "Yes." "Then you will not return to your shop unless Archie accompanies you. You will not tamper with any books, devices, clocks, or cabinets without my consent, and you will surrender all customer correspondence for the past 3 months." Grunfeld opened his mouth, closed it, then nodded. "I will do as you say." Wolfe gave a satisfied grunt. "Then that will suffice." Fritz appeared at the threshold, silent as ever. "Beer," Wolfe said. Fritz nodded, and vanished. I stood, lifted the ledger, and stepped toward the bookshelves to place it in Wolfe's steel drawer. He kept it for documents too valuable to lose and too inconvenient to burn. Behind me, Grunfeld rose slowly. "May I ask," he said, "do you believe Wilton is still alive?" Wolfe did not answer. Fritz returned with the bottle and glass. He poured. Wolfe raised the glass and took a sip. Then, "I believe," he said softly, "that Wilton Hennessy learned something he should not have, and I believe someone learned that he knew it." Grunfeld swallowed. Fritz opened the door to the hallway. Grunfeld left without another word. Wolfe swirled the beer and closed his eyes. "It is always the ledgers," he said. I nodded. "Numbers don't lie." "No," he said, "but they are edited, and edits are very loud." The morning came in with a glaze of frost on the sidewalk, and a note clipped to the orchid room door. Fritz had tucked it under my saucer without ceremony, but Wolfe had signed it with a flourish. "Miss Pamela Keswick," it read, "resides at 621 Lexington Avenue. Proceed." By the time I reached the building, the city was yawning into daylight, and the doorman eyed me with the same disdain he probably reserved for misplaced groceries. "I'm here to see Miss Keswick," I said. "Is she expecting you?" "No, but she'll want to be." That got me a flat look and a lift of the chin. Still, he called upstairs, a pause, then, "She says you may come up, 5th floor, turn left." The elevator creaked like it had arthritis. The hallway outside was carpeted in burgundy and silence. I knocked. Pamela Keswick answered the door herself. She was in her mid-30s with pale blue eyes that looked directly and without effort. She wore a wool skirt and a cream blouse, high-collared, and buttoned with unnecessary precision. Her voice was neither soft nor hard, just precise. "Yes?" "Miss Keswick, I'm Archie Goodwin. I work with Nero Wolfe." Her brow rose slightly. "May I come in?" She considered, then stepped aside. The apartment was modest, not threadbare. Every surface held one item: a book, a lamp, a silver-framed photo. Nothing doubled, nothing cluttered. "You're investigating Wilton Hennessy's disappearance. You know about that?" "Yes. Mr. Grunfeld called me last night. He said you'd asked about the watch." "I did. And?" "And I'd like to see yours." Pamela moved to a sideboard and returned with a lacquered box. Inside was a pocket watch, identical in style and make to the one Claudia Bellamy had shown me. I held it gently, thumbed the lid open and studied the inscription. 2 PK MB. Keep hours like memories. Close, but never clutched. I tilted the edge toward the light. The engraving was fluid, elegant, not as deep as Claudia's. "Did Mortimer Bellamy give this to you?" "Yes." "When?" 3 years ago." "And you kept it all this time?" "I did." "You didn't mention it when the estate went to probate." She sat down on the arm of a chair. "Mortimer left no will. I never expected anything. But when Claudia entered a claim, I knew she would use her position to fabricate ties." "Position?" "She was hired help. His caretaker. They weren't related." "You are?" "Distantly. My mother's cousin married Mortimer's brother. That hardly makes me kin, but I was the only person he saw outside paid staff." "Do you have proof of that?" She nodded. "There's a letter. He wrote it the year before he died." "May I see it?" She opened a desk drawer and handed me a folded sheet. It was dated, handwritten, and notarized. "To whom it may concern, Pamela Keswick has been in all meaningful ways my ward. I have no blood heir, and I wish for her to receive my estate should I pass without other arrangement. She has never asked for this. It is my choice, and it is final. Signed, Mortimer Bellamy. Witnessed by a notary from Ridgefield." "You submitted this?" "Yes, but it's not a formal will. Claudia's lawyer challenged it." "So now it's down to the watch?" Pamela nodded. "Mortimer only had one made. If mine is real, hers is not." I looked again at the watch. The hinge was smooth, the clasp untouched. "Do you know Wilton Hennessy?" "I met him once." "When?" 10 days ago. I brought the watch in for inspection. He examined it. Said the style matched others from Bellamy's era. He seemed confident. "Did he know about Claudia?" "Yes, I told him." "What did he say?" "He said he'd seen the other one, that it looked too sharp. He said it was recent work trying to look older. His words." "Did he offer to testify?" "No." "Did he seem afraid?" She paused. "Not afraid. Guarded." "Did he write anything down?" "I don't know." I closed the box and handed it back. "Did you ever meet Mortimer's engraver?" "No." "Do you know who he was?" "Only that he was French. Retired." "Did Mortimer ever mention him?" "No. He only said the man worked in silver, not gold. That's why the chain doesn't match." I glanced at the chain. It was steel, not gold. "I may need to speak with your lawyer." "I'll give you his name." She wrote it down on a card and handed it to me. As I stood, she followed. "Mr. Goodwin?" "Yes." "I didn't want the estate, but if Claudia's allowed to take it, I understand." "No, you don't. Mortimer didn't trust people, especially those he paid. Claudia fed him, managed his medicines, but she also read his mail, opened his books, controlled his house. That doesn't prove anything." "No," she said, "but it explains why he made me promise never to speak her name again." I left. The elevator groaned as I descended. Back on the street, I flagged a cab and gave the driver an address Wolfe would frown at. The man I needed was in a workshop above a shoeshine parlour on Bleecker. Claude Martin, retired engraver. French by birth, irritable by temperament. He answered my knock with a scowl. "Oui?" "Claude Martin?" "Non." "I was told you did custom engraving for Mortimer Bellamy." He paused, then stepped back. The workshop was a nest of brass tools, velvet pouches, and unlit lamps. Martin sat with a pipe that hadn't been smoked in hours and pointed at a stool. "I did one watch for Bellamy," he said, "long ago." Do you remember what it said? I do. He pointed to a drawer. Open it. I did. Inside was a photo, black and white, slightly curled, a watch in the centre, face open. The inscription read, "To CB, MB, may the hours serve you kindly." I blinked. That was Claudia's. Did you engrave that? Yes. Then you engraved Claudia Bellamy's? No. But I engraved it for Mortimer Bellamy. He asked for CB. I assumed it was a niece. I delivered it. He paid in cash. When? 5 years ago. So Claudia's watch is real. He frowned. No. Why not? Because Bellamy came back 6 months later, asked for another. Same make, different inscription. I refused. Said I only engraved once for him. What happened? He said never mind, that he'd find someone else. Did he mention the name Pamela Keswick? Martin thought. Yes, he said. She'll know the difference, even if they don't. That was enough. I thanked him and left. The cab back to the brownstone seemed slower than usual. I stepped into the office and handed Wolfe the photo. He studied it. From Martin? Yes, he engraved Claudia's. But refused to engrave Pamela's. Correct. Then only one is his. Which one? Claudia's. But Wolfe. Yes, Archie? Martin told Mortimer refused a second commission, said Pamela would know the difference. Wolfe closed his eyes. Bring both women in, he said. We must see which one the lie belongs to. It was 4:30 when I arrived at 86th Street, a few streets north of the museum, and several notches above my usual altitude. The buildings up there didn't sprawl, they rose, narrow and quiet, with brass intercoms that took offence when you touched them without gloves. The address Wolfe had jotted on his blotter led me to a brownstone that had probably been respectable since before Grover Cleveland took office. A brass nameplate read, L. Hammond, Attorney at Law. Below that, etched on frosted glass, a discreet Keswick. I rang once. After a few moments the door clicked. She opened it herself. Pamela Keswick wore a grey blouse, pearl earrings, and an expression that had survived worse than city air. Her voice had no starch and no warmth, just clarity. Mr. Goodwin. Miss Keswick. I was told you might come. She stepped aside. I entered. The foyer was narrow, lined with portraits of dead lawyers and a grandfather clock that ticked as if waiting for someone to apologize. She led me into a back room, small but clean. A fire burned in the grate. To one side sat a tea set with one cup used and the other untouched. My cousin is out, she said, but he gave his blessing if that matters. I sat. She remained standing. I understand you've spoken with Claudia Bellamy. I have. And Elias Grunfeld? Yes. She lowered herself into the chair across from me. Her back stayed straight. And now me. I nodded. That's how it goes. She poured herself more tea, did not offer any. You said on the phone you wished to confirm my claim. That's right. I've already given you Mortimer's letter. What else would you require? I pulled a notebook from my coat pocket and flipped it open. Your watch. She didn't flinch. Instead, she set her teacup aside and reached into the drawer of the writing desk. She returned with a black velvet pouch and handed it to me. I opened it slowly. The watch gleamed, polished, but not too polished. The chain was a plain steel weave, unpolished, utilitarian. I examined the edge. This doesn't match the gold casing. No. Why the mismatch? It's the only chain Mortimer would wear. Steel reminded him of time spent as a machinist during the war. I glanced up. Which war? The first one. And he told you that? Yes, the year before he died. I opened the watch and studied the engraving. MB to P. 3 letters, perfectly spaced, clean but lacking the ornament I'd seen on Claudia's piece. This is the only engraving? Yes. No dedication? He didn't believe in sentiment. Did you have it authenticated? I did. Where? At a watchmaker in Greenwich last month. Do you have the report? She rose, walked to the shelf and retrieved a folder. Inside was a carbon copy. The analysis was detailed. Chain alloy, hinge pattern, wear marks, serial reference. The conclusion read, engraving consistent with early 1930s private commissions. Style typical of French-trained artisan using shallow serif script, not consistent with recent rotary methods. I folded it closed and handed it back. You've never met Claudia Bellamy? No. Never seen her? No. Spoken with Elias Grunfeld? Never. Wilton Hennessy? I met him once. When? Last week. I brought the watch to his shop. Did you make an appointment? No, I walked in. Who was there? Only Wilton. Mr. Grunfeld was out. He examined the watch. Yes. What did he say? She hesitated, not dramatically, just long enough to pick the words. He said the engraving was possibly authentic, but he wanted time to compare it to their records. I left it with him for the afternoon. And when you returned? He had written notes. He said he believed it had been engraved before 1935, possibly by the same man who worked on a few other pieces Mortimer owned. He didn't name him. Did he ask about Claudia? No. Did you tell him? No. Did he seem nervous? Yes. In what way? He glanced at the window, twice. Anything else? He asked whether I had documentation linking the watch to Mortimer. You showed him the letter? No, just told him it existed. Did he ask to see it? No. Did he mention the name Claudia at any point? No. I wrote that down. She watched my pencil move but didn't comment. May I ask why you're pursuing this with such care, Mr. Goodwin? Because Wilton Hennessy is missing, possibly dead, and this watch, your watch, is part of that. She nodded once. Do you believe I'm involved? I believe you own a watch that 2 other people would like to disprove. I closed my notebook. And I believe Wilton Hennessy knew something about which one was genuine. She didn't move. Then, I never asked to be named. Mortimer gave me that watch on a cold Wednesday in November. No reason, no explanation, just said, I trust you'll know what it means. Did you? No, but I do now. She stood. I followed suit. At the door she paused. If Claudia forged her claim, she said, she's not only a liar, she's dangerous. I'm working on that. She opened the door. The air outside had turned sharp and blue with twilight. As I stepped out, she called my name. Mr. Goodwin? I turned. You said possibly dead. Yes. I don't think he is. Why? Because if he were, someone would have tried to make him disappear properly. That sat with me all the way down the stairs and across Lexington. By the time I reached the curb, I was thinking not about watches or steel chains or inscriptions. I was thinking about windows, and whether Wilton Hennessy had ever really looked away from them, or just through them, to see who stood behind the glass. At precisely 3:07 that afternoon, the doorbell rang. I was halfway through a perfectly adequate ham sandwich, seated at my desk and pretending to ignore Wolfe's glowering gaze aimed at the latest edition of the Gazette. He was trying to read a column that had the gall to misquote Pliny, and I was trying to enjoy lunch before the next shoe dropped. The bell rang again. Fritz didn't move. He never did. Not for visitors. That was my department. I wiped my hands, crossed the room and opened the door. Inspector Kramer stood in the vestibule, face set, jaw locked, a brown envelope clutched in one fist like it had insulted his mother. Archie, he said. Inspector, you're early for dinner and too late for lunch. He grunted. He in? You know better. He brushed past me without waiting. I shut the door behind him and followed. By the time I caught up, he was halfway to Wolfe's desk. Wolfe didn't rise. He didn't need to. Inspector, he said, setting the Gazette aside. I trust this is professional. Kramer's nostrils flared. You think I came here for tea? No, that would require civility. Kramer planted himself in the red chair across from Wolfe's yellow one, opened the envelope and removed 2 glossy photographs. Recognize him? Wolfe glanced down. Hennessy. Formally. Wolfe didn't blink. Where? Bronx River, culvert east of Tremont. Pulled him out yesterday. Dumped face down in leaves and sewer wash. Wolfe closed his eyes. When? Dead, about 48 hours, give or take. Coroner says blunt force trauma. Skull fracture, back of the head. He slid the photos forward. I picked them up. Wilton Hennessy, or what was left of him, lay in a tangle of roots and wet fabric. His coat was twisted, collar torn, no shoes. No wallet, I asked. Kramer shook his head. Gone, along with his watch, whatever it was. Wristwatch, Wolfe asked. Pocket maybe, doesn't matter. He didn't die for it. Yet, you said trauma. Robbery implies motive. Robbery implies logic. This was clean up. Ah. Kramer leaned back, pulled a cigar from his coat, and didn't light it. You've been sniffing around a watch too, haven't you? Yes, Wolfe said. Care to tell me why? No, Kramer bristled. Look, Wolfe, I'm not in the mood. You seldom are. Kramer set the unlit cigar on the edge of the desk. He was found with mud under his nails and a train stub in his coat. Westport, 3 days ago. Wolfe opened his eyes. Kramer continued. No signs of struggle at his place. No blood, no broken locks. Studio was clean. Too clean, I added. Kramer shot me a glance, then turned back to Wolfe. So I'm here, he said, to ask whether your nosing around this Bellamy business had anything to do with it. It did, Wolfe said calmly. That stopped Kramer. What? I said it did. Well, don't be coy. Start talking. Wolfe shifted in his chair. The deceased came to possess information that threatened the veracity of an inheritance claim. 2 women, 2 watches. One man caught between what he knew and what he could prove. Kramer raised an eyebrow. Who are the women? Claudia Bellamy and Pamela Keswick. Related? No. One was Mortimer Bellamy's caretaker. The other, his ward. Ward? In a letter. Informal. Not legally binding, but notarized. Kramer scratched his temple. And this inheritance, how much? Wolfe didn't answer. Ballpark it, Kramer said. I'm not asking for your billable hours. Wolfe sighed. High 6 figures, possibly more. Kramer whistled. Enough to kill for. Yes. You have both watches. I do not, but I have examined them. Identical? No. Superficially similar. The chains differ, the inscriptions differ, but the forgeries are clever. Kramer leaned in. So who's lying? Wolfe's mouth twitched. Both possibly, but one more than the other. You think this Hennessy kid figured it out? Yes. And someone silenced him. Before he could share it, or document it, or worse, testify. Kramer drummed his fingers on the armrest. You got proof? Wolfe shook his head. Only inference. That won't hold up in court. No, Wolfe said, but it might help prevent another body. Kramer frowned. You think someone else is next? I think whoever went to the trouble to remove Wilton Hennessy didn't do it out of anger. They did it out of need. And needs don't vanish. No, Wolfe said. They escalate. Kramer stood. You going to share your notes? I have none. Archie? I take dictation, I said, not confessions. Kramer growled. You know, Wolfe, someday your ego's going to be the death of someone. That's already been attempted, Wolfe replied, and failed. Kramer turned to the door. At the threshold he stopped. Let me be clear, he said. If I find out you've been withholding... You won't, Wolfe said. Kramer paused. Then, with a grunt, he left. I watched him descend the stairs through the glass pane. Wolfe turned to me. Archie. Yes? Get Saul, quietly. Have him begin surveillance on both women. Round the clock. No substitutions, no contact. Got it. And request from Lon Cohen the probate filing for Bellamy's estate. All attachments. Yes, sir. Wolfe leaned back and closed his eyes. The body, he murmured, was a message. To whom? To anyone else thinking of telling the truth. I went to the phone, and I dialed Saul. It was a Wednesday. The rain had come and gone, and Manhattan wore the residue like a silk glove that had seen too many handshakes. The windows of the brownstone caught the light with a kind of reluctant elegance, and Wolfe, in the rarest expression of boredom, had resorted to tapping the arm of his yellow chair with the side of his index finger. That meant something had disturbed the rhythm of his day, and unless it had to do with beer delivery, Fritz's stock of tripe, or the orchid house temperature dropping by 1/2 degree, that something was likely human. Archie, he said, without opening his eyes, how long has Fritz been in the kitchen? I glanced at the hall clock. 17 minutes. Too long, he murmured, and just then the door opened. Fritz stepped in, one hand holding a small linen-wrapped bundle. He crossed the rug with the caution of a man who has spent a lifetime preparing sauces and not disrupting epiphanies. He placed the parcel gently on Wolfe's desk. "I was cleaning," he said, as instructed. Wolfe opened his eyes. "This was in the tray," Fritz continued, "under the second shelf, behind the gears from the French clock." I unwrapped the linen. Inside were 5 porcelain shards from the shattered clock base. Each had been wiped, mostly, but one had a sheen. I leaned in. "Ink," I said. Wolfe reached for his loupe, one of the few instruments he would deign to touch when not eating or thumbing through monographs. He brought it close to the shard, tilted the edge. "Blue-black," he said. "Fluid, not paste. Still moist at the edges." "Still wet?" "No, but not long dry. Less than 48 hours. That raised my eyebrows. "The clock was broken before I arrived at Grunfeld's shop," I said. "But the police had already dusted the place. No mention of ink." Wolfe nodded. "Then someone returned, after you, and removed something." I blinked. "You think the ledger pages were hidden in the clock?" "Not think. No." He pointed to the curve of the fragment. "This is the interior surface, and the ink is transferred, which means the paper was flush against it, folded, and rested there long enough to mark the porcelain." "But then someone came back," I said, "and fished them out." "Indeed. Why hide them there in the first place?" Wolfe closed his eyes again. "Because the studio was locked. Because the books had been examined. Because no one would suspect the interior of a defunct French timepiece. Except the person who put them there." "Precisely." I sat back. "So either Wilton hid them, and someone else knew, or the reverse," Wolfe said. I rose and crossed to the bookshelf, pulled the studio photographs we'd had developed and flipped to the interior shots. "Here," I said. "See this? The clock's dome was intact when I arrived. Shattered, yes, but placed back over the base, like someone didn't want it to look disturbed." Wolfe nodded. "Which means the return visitor was cautious, experienced. And Claudia had an opportunity. She had a motive, she had access, and she had a need." I sat back down. "So this means the pages were there, inside the clock. I didn't find them, but I didn't know to look." "You weren't expected to." Wolfe reached forward and tapped the edge of the fragment. "But the ink betrays them." I exhaled. "Want me to pay Claudia a visit?" "No." "No?" Wolfe steepled his fingers. "We must proceed carefully. The person who removed those pages may have thought they succeeded." "May have? If Claudia retrieved them, she may believe they are gone for good. But now we have the proof they were hidden. Ink residue, enough to suggest intent." "Yes," Wolfe said. "And if we were to call her in now, she would deny it." I nodded. "So we wait." "Not quite." He rang for Fritz. Fritz appeared without sound. "Phone call," Wolfe said. "To Mr. Saul Pantzer. I wish him to follow Miss Bellamy discreetly." "Today?" I asked. "Now." Fritz vanished. I leaned back. "You think she'll make a move?" "She already has. We simply haven't witnessed it." I stood and crossed to the fireplace. The clock there was ticking, one of Wolfe's few personal indulgences in motion. He watched it not for the hour, but for the rhythm. "I don't get it," I said. "Why not just destroy the pages?" Wolfe closed his eyes. "Because she may not know their full value yet, or she intends to use them, or—" "Blackmail?" He nodded once. "It is not uncommon for someone who steals information to believe it is more useful in hand than gone." I walked to the window. The sky outside was losing light. Lamplight cast gold across the desk. Wolfe hadn't touched the beer Fritz had brought him earlier. "She's calculating," I said. "Yes." "Too calculating?" "Not necessarily, but careless." "Careless how?" "The ink. She removed the pages, but did not check the porcelain. She couldn't have known it would show." "No, but she should have considered what she didn't know." I turned. "You still think she killed Wilton?" "I think someone did. And I think Wilton was silenced not because he knew everything, but because he knew enough to ask questions. And Claudia had more to lose than Pamela. Pamela had inheritance. Claudia had forgery." Wolfe reached for the envelope I'd brought earlier, a copy of the ledger's last 3 visible entries. He tapped the bottom line. "This," he said, was written in Wilton's hand. But the signature line is blank, a transaction with no confirmation. An invisible buyer. Yes. I looked closer. The line read, repair declined, watch returned, chain replaced. Wait, I said, chain replaced? Wolfe nodded. That could explain the steel chain on Pamela's piece. Or the replacement link on Claudia's. I stared at him. He stared back. And then I understood. You think there's a third watch? No, he said. I think there's one, but two claims, and only one chain tells the truth. I grabbed my coat. He raised an eyebrow. I'll be back in 20, I said. He said nothing, but he knew. 23 minutes later, I was standing in front of Claudia Bellamy's apartment. The hallway smelled of lilac and polish. I rang once. She opened the door in a robe and a look that wasn't surprised enough. Mr. Goodwin. Miss Bellamy. I won't be long. She stood aside. I entered. The lights were low. The sitting room looked untouched, but the hearth smelled of fresh ash. I walked past her before she could object and crouched at the fireplace. The ash was grey, but one corner was darker, stiff. Paper. I reached in with my handkerchief. The fragment came free, half a ledger line browned at the edge, but the ink still legible. Wolfe had been right. She hadn't destroyed it all. Miss Bellamy, I said, rising, did you forget your receipt? She blinked. What? You returned to Grunfeld's shop, retrieved the pages from the French clock. That's absurd. Is it? I held out the charred slip. She stared at it, and then she made her move. It wasn't violent. It wasn't loud. It was just fast. She turned, reached for her purse, and pulled out a leather case. Inside, the watch. I still have it, she said. It's mine. Not the watch. She froze. You still have the receipts. I don't. Miss Bellamy. She stood very still. Then she sat down, quietly. You don't understand, she said. Try me. I was promised it, the estate, all of it. By Mortimer? Yes. In writing? No. Then it doesn't matter. It does to me. I stepped forward. She looked up. I didn't kill him, she said. I paused. Hennessy? She nodded. I went to the studio. I took the pages. I burned them. Not all. I tried. Why? She looked at me. Because he said he wouldn't lie for me. I stared at her for a long moment. Then I picked up the case. The steel chain was there, and one link. Had fresh solder. I closed it. Thank you, Miss Bellamy, I said. I suppose you're calling the police. No, I said. Not yet. I turned. She didn't stop me. Back at the brownstone, I handed Wolfe the charred slip, the case, and my notes. He examined them all. Then he said, She blinked. Yes. Then we have her. Not for the murder. No, but for the lie. And the pages? She'll never retrieve what she burned. No. But she'll remember. Wolfe leaned back. Because, he said softly, some ink dries, and some never quite does. The morning began like any other, with the sound of Fritz arranging breakfast china in the kitchen, and Wolfe refusing to speak until his eggs had cooled to precisely room temperature. The air outside was crisp, not biting, and the lamplight inside the office had that soft diffusion that comes with late November. Wolfe had already issued the instructions the night before. Both women were to arrive precisely at 11. Claudia Bellamy and Pamela Arden, each summoned under the pretense of final clarification, a term Wolfe employed with just enough vagueness to keep their nerves from settling. I had laid the groundwork. Their watches had been mentioned, their presence expected, and neither had refused. By 10:45, Wolfe was in his chair, yellow leather, deeply worn, arms squared. He had not touched the beer. That told me this wasn't routine. Archie, he said, eyes closed, are you armed with patience? I holstered a double load this morning. He opened one eye. You'll need it. At precisely 11 o'clock, the bell rang. Fritz appeared, immaculate as always, but he didn't touch the doorknob. That task remained mine, as ever. I crossed the rug and opened the wrought iron door. Pamela Arden entered first. She wore navy blue, simple, tailored, quiet. Her hair was pinned tightly at the nape, her face composed. Her eyes, however, darted to every object in the room with a kind of gentle panic that betrayed her civility. Claudia Bellamy followed. Her coat was deeper, charcoal, almost black, and she removed her gloves slowly, as if each finger required consideration. Where Pamela's anxiety was interior, Claudia's was structural, a poise too deliberate, like scaffolding hiding a collapse. They sat. Claudia chose the left chair. Pamela took the right. Wolfe opened his eyes fully and gave a slight nod. "Thank you for your punctuality." Neither spoke. He lifted a hand, just enough to motion me forward. "Mr. Goodwin will take possession of your watches." They hesitated. Pamela moved first. She unfastened hers with care, offering it without comment. I took it with a handkerchief and placed it on Wolfe's blotter. Claudia, slower, did the same. Her glance toward Pamela was short, sharp, and anything but accidental. Wolfe examined both items without touching them. The first, Pamela's, bore the familiar rose gold finish. The engraving on its underside was simple, for P, MG. The chain had 3 links replaced, newer but professionally done. The second, Claudia's, had an identical face, near identical weight. The chain, however, had a single link that bore a faint irregularity, just shy of polish. The engraving was more elaborate, CB Toujours. He looked at neither woman. "I have taken the liberty," Wolfe said, "of consulting the engraver responsible for Mr. Grunfeld's personal effects." Pamela's eyes lifted. Claudia's chin didn't move. Wolfe tapped a small brass bell beside his bier. Fritz entered and handed him a sealed envelope. Wolfe did not open it. Instead, he passed it to me. I broke the seal. Inside were 2 cards. I read aloud. Only one of the 2 samples bears the authentic stylistic flourish of my studio, a double loop in the ampersand, and the minor indentation before the second initial. That piece belongs to Miss Pamela Arden. Pamela inhaled, slow, tight. Claudia didn't blink. Wolfe now turned his gaze to Claudia. "This watch," he said, tapping hers lightly with the eraser end of a pencil, "was engraved by a different hand, not Mr. Raphael at Delancey & Sons." Still Claudia did not speak. Wolfe lifted the chain. "This link," he said, "was replaced within the last 3 weeks. Solder is still fresh." "May I speak?" Claudia asked. Her voice clipped. Wolfe raised an eyebrow. She looked at Pamela, then back to Wolfe. "I never claimed it was engraved at Delancey." "No," Wolfe said. "You merely implied provenance by association." Claudia's jaw tightened. Wolfe steepled his fingers. "The question is not who engraved which watch," he said. "The question is which of you wore it first, and who wore it after." I leaned forward slightly. Wolfe didn't glance my way, but his next words told me I wasn't the only one catching the rhythm. "Miss Arden," he said, "when did you receive your watch?" Pamela looked straight ahead. 4 years ago, on my birthday." "And the engraving?" "I asked Mortimer to keep it simple." Wolfe nodded once. "Miss Bellamy?" Claudia smiled, thin, humourless. "I received mine 2 years ago, after Paris." "Paris," Wolfe repeated. "He bought it during our trip." "Yet the watch is American-made." "He purchased it prior to the trip, gave it to me there." "And engraved it afterward?" "He had it engraved before we left." "Then the chain should predate your journey." Claudia blinked. I stepped forward. "Miss Bellamy," I said, "we have confirmation the replacement link was added 3 weeks ago. The solder's colour has not yet fully set, which means the watch was tampered with long after Mortimer Grunfeld's death." Still she said nothing. Pamela turned slightly in her chair. Her fingers were interlocked so tightly her knuckles had paled. Wolfe spoke again. "This matter is not one of inheritance," he said. "It is a question of legitimacy, and, to a smaller extent, forgery." Claudia stood abruptly. "If you are accusing me of something, Mr. Wolfe, I ask that you say it plainly." "I'm accusing you," Wolfe said, "of modifying this watch, removing its original engraving and replacing it with a fabricated one. A falsification designed to mirror Miss Arden's, in the hope that you could claim a shared gift, a shared status, and perhaps an unearned claim to sentiment or possession." Claudia's voice was sharp now. "You can't prove that." "On the contrary," Wolfe said calmly, "I already have." He pointed to the card I still held. "Delancey's records show only one such order. Your engraving does not match their file. Miss Arden's does." Pamela's shoulders dropped just slightly. as though the air had changed. Claudia looked to me, then back to Wolfe. "This is absurd," she said. "Watches can be identical." "They can," Wolfe said, "but people are not. And neither are motives." She laughed. It was brittle. "You think I killed him for a chain?" "No," Wolfe said. "I think you lied for one." Silence. It sat in the room like damp wool. Finally, Claudia stepped back. "He promised me." "I am sure he promised many things," Wolfe said, "but promises do not write themselves into ledgers, nor do they engrave truth into metal." I waited for her to argue. She didn't. Instead, she turned to Pamela, her voice lowered. "You always had his eye." Pamela's lip trembled. Once. She steadied it. "I had his ear," she said. "You wanted his legacy." Wolfe nodded once. "That will be all, ladies." Pamela rose slowly. She did not look at Claudia. Claudia turned on her heel and walked to the door. I followed them out. When I returned, Wolfe had lifted his beer. He took a sip, set it down, closed his eyes. I didn't speak. After a long moment, he said, "Truth," he murmured, "requires no chain, but deceit always leaves a link." I stood by the window, watching the wind batter the leaves against the wrought iron railing. The street below was quieter than usual, muffled by the threat of rain. Wolfe was in his chair, unmoving, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. He had not spoken in 2 full minutes. "Are you waiting for a trumpet, sir, or just savouring the suspense?" He opened his eyes. "You've confirmed it. Her name is not Bellamy." "Right. It's Claudine Benoit. Came over from Marseille in '34. Worked private care jobs through the decade. She was employed by Mortimer Grunfeld as a live-in caretaker, until he let her go 3 months before his death." "Dismissed?" "Not gently. His lawyer said Mortimer accused her of impropriety. Didn't elaborate, just ended the arrangement and made a note of it in the will." Wolfe's brows lifted a hair. "Impropriety, but not theft?" "Doesn't say." He reached toward the desk, picked up the gold watch. The chain still bore that uneven link. "The engraving?" I handed him the etching report. "Standard steel stylus," I said. "Not a professional job. Microscopic skips and uneven pressure. Someone faked it with a cheap tool, probably handheld." Wolfe let out a breath that was nearly a sigh. "And Wilton?" "Wilton spent 4 years on and off with Grunfeld's estate firm. Office in the same building. If anyone knew who had what, or didn't, it was him." "You believe he confronted her?" "I think he found out. Maybe cornered her. Maybe threatened to go public." Wolfe drummed a finger lightly on the watch face. "And what do we know of Miss Arden?" "Still clean. Pamela Arden is a legitimate niece born and raised in Rhode Island. No aliases, no gaps. Her presence at the reading was expected. Yet she received no watch." "Correct." "Then the inscription was not merely a forgery," Wolfe said, "but a theft of affection." "Grunfeld never gifted that watch to Claudine." Wolfe opened his eyes again and studied the ceiling. "A woman dismissed, denied, and written out. And yet, she returns, under a new name, bearing an heirloom she could not rightfully claim." I nodded. "The chain was added after Mortimer's death, the inscription forged. She wanted the world to think she mattered. She wanted legitimacy." He fell silent again. I crossed the room, leaned against the red chair. "So what's the play?" "We bring her here." "You want to confront her?" "No, I want her to speak. Truth, when cornered, tends to reveal itself more willingly than when invited." I picked up the phone, dialed, waited. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Miss Bellamy," I said. "Mr. Wolfe asks for a word." She hesitated. Then, "I'll come." Wolfe didn't move. He simply nodded. She arrived just before 7. The rain had started. She wore a trench coat, no hat, and her curls were pinned as neatly as before. Her face, however, had changed, less guarded, more drawn. She sat without invitation. "You asked for me." Wolfe inclined his head. "You have not been honest." She blinked. "About what?" "Your name." "Nothing." "Your position." Still nothing. "And this," he said, tapping the watch. Her voice, when it came, was quieter than I expected. "You've done your work." "Indeed." She looked at the gold, polished face, the false engraving. "I took care of him for 3 years," she said. "I bathed him, fed him, changed the linens no nurse would touch. Wolfe remained silent. And then she showed up, Claudine said. Pretty niece with clear skin and old letters. Suddenly, I was invisible. I leaned on the desk, arms crossed. He fired you. She nodded. Said I crossed a line. I didn't. Not like that. He just didn't want me around when she came. So you left? He gave me $100 and cab fare. I left the next morning. Wolfe lifted a brow. And the watch? I came back the next day. He wasn't home. The door was locked, but I had a key. She looked up now. He kept it in the bedroom on the dresser. I knew the drawer. He'd shown it to me once when he was lucid. Said it was for someone special. And you decided it was you. I needed it to be. Wolfe tapped the desk again. And Mr. Wilton? She swallowed. He saw it, at the reading. He looked at it too long, asked too many questions, came by the next night, said he knew it was forged. Did you deny it? I tried. He called me a fraud, said he'd tell the firm. And then? She hesitated, looked down. I told him to leave. And he did? She nodded. I never saw him again. Wolfe closed his eyes. Miss Benoit, he said, I understand loneliness, but forging memory does not make it yours. She said nothing. You may go. She stood. Her hands trembled. She turned without another word. When the door closed, Wolfe spoke. Grief, he said, can twist the noblest motives into poison. I said nothing. He turned the watch face down, then pushed it aside. The game, at last, had ended. Kramer's arrival was a minute early. Fritz didn't open the door naturally. I did. The inspector stepped inside with the same tight-lipped look he wore when bringing bad weather. Wolfe didn't rise, but did glance up from his chair. Yellow upholstery, of course. He gestured toward the red one. Inspector. Wolfe. Kramer took his seat like it owed him something. His eyes darted once toward the desk. No coffee, no beer, he said. I've got a briefing at 1. A pity, Wolfe murmured. A beer would smooth the facts. You've got facts? Yes. Kramer leaned forward. Wolfe steepled his fingers. You'll recall Miss Claudia arrived bearing a watch. She claimed it had belonged to Mortimer, engraved, sentimental, a relic. She cited it as evidence of intimacy, a basis for inheritance, a ploy. She wasn't kin. Correct, but appearances can briefly deceive until examined. Wolfe turned slightly. Archie? I stood across the room and placed the 2 watches on the desk. Claudia's, gold. Pamela's, platinum. They were found in Wilton's drawer, I said, wrapped in his old handkerchief. Kramer snorted. That doesn't make 'em his. Indeed, Wolfe said, but the ledger does. He opened the thin volume resting beside the blotter. Fitzroy Wilton was meticulous. Every item serviced, every date logged, including watches. Wolfe flipped pages until he found the one he'd marked. Note the entries, Inspector. Claudia's watch was brought in twice, once in March 41, once in June 43. The March entry lists the owner as MC, that is, Mortimer Calloway. Kramer blinked. And the June one? Owner, CB and Claudia Bellamy. But see the detail. The March entry includes a correction, original initials MC, scratched and replaced. That indicates deception. He tapped the page. Wilton knew the watch had always been hers. She had etched MVS into the backplate. Crude, shallow, but convincing to a layman. Wilton was not a layman. Kramer's mouth twisted. So she faked it. Yes, she used her former position as Mortimer's caretaker to stage the claim. A tenuous one, but enough to delay Pamela's inheritance. I added, she was fired 6 months before Mortimer died. Never mentioned that. Wilton refused to lie for her, Wolfe continued. He may have threatened exposure. The watch's true origin was his to prove, hence the ledger. Kramer leaned closer. Where are the missing pages? Wolfe drew a breath. Beneath the lining of Wilton's toolbox. Archie discovered them. Kramer turned to me. Yesterday afternoon, while you were scowling in the hallway. He ignored that. Wolfe resumed. The torn pages list 4 additional watches, none belonging to Mortimer, including Claudia's. One is engraved with a fleur-de-lis traced to a banker in Tribeca. Another belonged to a pianist. The third to a bellhop at the Excelsior Hotel. Kramer grunted. All hers? Yes, all etched, all pawned. Claudia used the same method each time, all to the inscription, fabricate sentiment, press a claim. Kramer's jaw tightened. She tried this before? Successfully, I presume, until now. He took off his hat, stared into it. She killed him over this? Yes, Wolfe said flatly. Wilton knew. He was the only one who could dismantle her claim. She confronted him. Whether she intended to kill from the outset, I cannot say. But opportunity, pressure, and temperament merged. She struck. With what? A marble paperweight from his desk. That fits. She then staged the drawer, placed the watches, removed the ledger pages. Why not destroy them? She was sentimental, or overconfident, or both. Kramer rose slowly. You've got enough here to bury her. Wolfe inclined his head. Inspector, I do not bury, I uncover. Kramer moved to the door. I'll call the ADA. She'll be in cuffs by sundown. He paused. You could have told me this 2 days ago. Wolfe closed the ledger. I had not deduced it 2 days ago. Still, you may take the ledger. He did. Fritz appeared silently with Kramer's coat. The inspector gave me a look halfway between thanks and a growl. When the door shut behind him, Wolfe reached for his beer. A satisfactory outcome, Archie. Except for Wilton. Yes. He raised the glass. To the man who kept ledgers. To the man who told the truth, I said. We drank. Kramer had just taken Claudia down the front steps when Wolfe's eyes shifted, only slightly. He hadn't risen. He hadn't spoken. But I knew the look. I closed the front door. The echo of Claudia's heels vanished into West 35th. Pamela stood near the drinks tray, one gloved hand gripping the edge. Her other hand still clutched the clutch bag, rigid at her side. Wolfe's voice broke the hush, polished, dry. Miss Fleming, there is a second deceit. Pamela didn't move. He placed his hands flat on the arms of the yellow chair. You and Miss Claudia were not strangers. A soft intake of breath, not from her but from Fritz behind the doorframe. You met Wilton together, 3 days before his death. Pamela's eyes didn't blink. Her voice, when it came, was cool. I saw him, briefly. Claudia was present. Briefly, you offered him a script. He looked to me. I reached into the drawer and removed the smaller of the 2 notebooks, the one from Wilton's desk. Wolfe gestured. Page 5. I flipped. There, in Wilton's hand, Pamela, claim engraving, Claudia nervous. She flinched. You fed him the story about the watch, Wolfe said. She opened her mouth, then shut it again. You feared your claim alone would lack ballast, a solitary tale from a jilted lover. Her voice dropped a note. Claudia said he might believe her. I thought if both of us... Wolfe raised a hand. You deceived the police. You colluded with a woman now charged with murder. The silence that followed felt longer than it was. I didn't know she'd harm him, Pamela said softly. No, Wolfe agreed. But you were willing to let your own fabrications weigh the scales. She turned to me then. No, I said, don't. Wolfe's tone sharpened. You misled me, Miss Fleming. Had I known your proximity to both parties, I might have declined the engagement. Pamela dropped her gaze. Your claim was not false, but it was fortified with lies. That renders your integrity suspect. She took a step forward. I was desperate. He broke everything. The engagement, the payments, even my father's respect. And Claudia? Pamela's breath stuttered. She hated being behind, in anything. She said Wilton owed her something. Wolfe looked to the fireplace. The ledger pages, the ones with Claudia's false service dates, still rested in the frame. He didn't move to retrieve them. Schemes, Miss Fleming, he said, are rarely clean. One of you lied to elevate your standing. The other lied, then killed. Pamela said nothing. The flames whispered. Mr. Goodwin, escort Miss Fleming out. I rose. She didn't resist. Just before the door she turned. Would you have helped me if I'd told you everything? Wolfe's voice was quiet. No, but I might not have helped her. Pamela nodded. Then she left. Wolfe looked at me. "Schemes, Archie," he said, "require actors, but truth, thank heaven, demands only proof." I nodded. The flame crackled. The rain had given the street outside a glisten, but the studio was dry as bone. When Kramer stepped in beside me, his coat was unbuttoned, hat tilted back. He looked around as though daring someone to ask what took him so long. "You got the warrant?" Kramer grunted and patted his breast pocket. "Signed, sealed, and less than delighted. You sure this is the right shop?" "I'd bet Fritz's stock pot." He didn't laugh. He never did. He nodded to the uniform at the door and told him to keep it sealed. Inside, the scent hadn't changed since my last visit. Oilcloth, wood dust, and whatever time leaves behind in an abandoned place. Kramer crossed to the workbench where Wilton had once leaned in close enough to catch a bullet behind the ear. I stood by the wall, arms folded. He scanned the bench, muttered something, then glanced back. "Nothing here. You sure there's a compartment?" I moved to the side and pressed a hand under the shelf, right where Wilton's heel had scuffed the wood too often for coincidence. Click. Kramer raised an eyebrow. I opened the shallow panel. Inside was a worn folder, thick and stiff with age. I handed it to him, resisting the urge to say, "Ta-da." He flipped it open. Notes, his own handwriting, ledger-style entries. I leaned in. "Look here." A carbon slip, browned at the corners, dated 5 days before Wilton's death. A woman's name, not Claudia's, but too close to mistake. The item, gold pocket watch. Serial scratched, engraving incomplete. "Brought it in under an alias," I murmured. Kramer nodded slowly. "Before Mortimer was even dead." He took a breath, heavy with the weight of it. "That seals it," he said. "She planned it, from start to finish." We stood in silence as the rain returned, soft against the roof. Nothing else moved. Nothing else had to. Wolfe leaned back in the yellow chair, fingertips meeting under his chin. His eyes, half-lidded, tracked Claudia across the carpet as she crossed one leg, then the other, in the red chair to the right of his desk. She had come willingly. That much was clear. Her coat hung neatly on the rack. Her gloves, leather and limp, sat on the side table. She offered no protest now, no tears, just a quiet readiness, a woman resigned to what she thought Wolfe would say. Pamela sat beside her, upright and folded in upon herself. She had said nothing since she arrived, and nothing now. Fritz had brought tea. No one drank it. Wolfe cleared his throat. "You have each in turn claimed the same object, and by that object, a man." He opened the drawer beside his elbow. From it he removed 2 boxes, both identical. Inside, nestled in velvet, sat 2 watches. One had been Pamela's, the other Claudia's, or so they said. Wolfe placed them beside each other on the blotter, then turned his gaze toward me. I opened the envelope. It had arrived that morning. The handwriting matched Wilton's. Inside, 1 folded letter, 1 pawn slip, and a receipt. The letter was addressed to Wilton himself, mailed, as Wolfe had predicted, from Wilton's own hand to his own address. Postmarked 2 days before the body was found. I unfolded it. Wolfe gestured slightly. "You may read." I cleared my throat and began. "Dear Wilton, if I go through with it, and I believe I must, you'll want this note close. You have always distrusted memory when emotion is involved, so here is the truth as I know it." Pamela shifted slightly. I went on. "The gold Belova, your father's, but was pawned in 1948. You had no use for it. I brought it to Golden Crown Loans on Bleecker. $5.75. You never asked after it again." Claudia stirred, the faintest twitch in her cheek. "The other watch, the one your father gave the gardener before he left for Cincinnati, was never returned. The gardener moved. You wrote to him twice. You showed me the letters. They were never answered." Wolfe interjected, quiet but final. "Both watches were, in essence, discarded." I nodded once and resumed. "You never bought another. You never wore one. You hated the feeling on your wrist." Pamela whispered something. I couldn't make it out. Claudia didn't move. I finished reading. "That should settle it. Neither of them have the right watch. Neither of them knew he hated them." Signed, Elias Wilton. Kramer, standing behind me, let out a single low grunt. "So, we've got 2 fake claims, not 1. Wolfe nodded once. "Indeed." Pamela looked down at her hands. "But I didn't lie," she murmured. "He gave it to me, said it had been his father's. I believed him." Possibly, Wolfe replied, but you told me it was his. You told me it had been left to you. That, Miss Rusk, is not belief. That is assertion. She fell silent. Claudia stood. No one's going to jail over a watch. Wolfe raised a brow. Are you quite certain? She hesitated. I didn't kill him. Nor did I suggest you had, but your false testimony might yet unravel more than you expect. I stepped forward. You said you found it in his studio. I did. You said it had his initials. They were his. They were someone's, I corrected, but not his. Kramer moved to the desk and picked up the pawn slip. This here shows the original, the real one, was never in either of your hands. Pamela leaned forward. Then who? The real watch, Wolfe said, is in a pawn vault 3 blocks from here. I had Saul confirm it this morning. The clerk's handwriting matches the 1948 receipt. The initials are correct. The serial number matches the registry from Belova's ledgers. Mr. Wilton was exacting. He left a trail. I added, and the true heir, his cousin, lives in Dayton, Ohio. The paperwork's en route. She didn't even know she had a claim. Pamela gave a soft, hollow laugh. So what now? What do we do? Wolfe reached for his beer. It had gone warm. He didn't mind. You reflect, Miss Rusk. As do you, Miss Otley. In matters of grief, truth has no obligation to comfort. Claudia pressed her lips together. I wanted something to keep, she said. You had memory, Wolfe replied. You chose forgery. She looked down, then back up. Her eyes held mine for a moment. I didn't want his money. No, Wolfe said. But you did want what it meant. Kramer stepped toward the door. I'll call the DA. Doesn't sound like we've got a murder case left, but I'll want statements from both of you. Pamela whispered. He's really gone, isn't he? Wolfe did not reply. I watched them both go, Claudia first, spine rigid. Pamela behind her, a little older than when she'd arrived. Kramer gave Wolfe a nod. Then the door closed. Wolfe sighed. You may burn those. I looked to the watches. Both? He nodded. They are nothing now. They are not him. I took them, boxes and all, and carried them to the fireplace. The flame was quiet. Wolfe remained seated, silent, unmoving. He spoke only once more before I left the room. Grief is not soothed by artifacts. I tossed the first box into the fire, then the second. They hissed, curled, and blackened. The clock in the hall chimed once. I looked up. Wolfe did not. The rain had given the street outside a glisten, but the studio was dry as bone. When Kramer stepped in beside me, his coat was unbuttoned, hat tilted back. He looked around as though daring someone to ask what took him so long. You got the warrant? Kramer grunted and patted his breast pocket. Signed, sealed, and less than delighted. You sure this is the right shop? I'd bet Fritz's stock pot. He didn't laugh. He never did. He nodded to the uniform at the door and told him to keep it sealed. Inside, the scent hadn't changed since my last visit. Oilcloth, wood dust, and whatever time leaves behind in an abandoned place. Kramer crossed to the workbench where Wilton had once leaned in close enough to catch a bullet behind the ear. I stood by the wall, arms folded. He scanned the bench, muttered something, then glanced back. Nothing here? You sure there's a compartment? I moved to the side and pressed a hand under the shelf, right where Wilton's heel had scuffed the wood too often for coincidence. Click. Kramer raised an eyebrow. I opened the shallow panel. Inside was a worn folder, thick and stiff with age. I handed it to him. Resisting the urge to say, ta-da, he flipped it open. Notes, his own handwriting, ledger-style entries. I leaned in. Look here. A carbon slip, browned at the corners. Dated 5 days before Wilton's death. A woman's name, not Claudia's, but too close to mistake. The item, gold pocket watch. Serial scratched, engraving incomplete. Brought it in under an alias, I murmured. Kramer nodded slowly. Before Mortimer was even dead. He took a breath, heavy with the weight of it. That seals it, he said. She planned it, from start to finish. We stood in silence as the rain returned, soft against the roof. Nothing else moved. Nothing else had to. The envelope stayed in my drawer for 8 days. Not because I'd forgotten it, and not because I was waiting for anything. I'd opened it once. I didn't need to again. Stamped with Wilton's return address, postmarked the day before he died. A brief note on heavy cream paper, the kind that absorbs ink like skin absorbs sweat. It had no salutation, no signature, just 3 lines. If they ask, I didn't know what it was worth. That's true, mostly. But I did know what it cost. Wolfe had said the case was closed. Kramer had grunted assent. Claudia was off to Rikers with a lawyer too polished and too quiet. Pamela, for her part, left the brownstone with the gait of someone balancing on cracked glass. Not a tear, but not much left to hold her upright either. The envelope stayed in the drawer under the stapler and above a half-spent roll of mints. I kept it. Not because of sentiment. That's not my department. But because sometimes a man writes his conscience before anyone else can. That afternoon, with Manhattan's air shifting towards something between damp and thawed, I stepped into the office from the hall. Wolfe was in his chair, yellow as ever, book balanced on his belly, one of the thicker ones. The spine read Our Principles of Chronometry, Horology Before Quartz. The title alone could kill a conversation at 10 paces. He didn't look up. Do close the window, Archie. We are not airing the Bronx. I obliged. You planning to build a clock next? No, but if I am to be surrounded by the relics of murdered timekeepers, I may as well understand their art. Philosophy with cogs. Wolfe turned a page. That is neither wit nor insight, but I suppose it qualifies as speech. I sat at my desk. The fire was down to its embers. The faint scent of burnt brass still hung in the room. I reached into the small tin beside me, retrieving the last gear from the clock Wilton had dropped the night before he died. Small, twisted, dented at the rim. The thing had likely belonged to a mechanism he'd built with care, then dismantled under pressure. It had no value anymore, no place to turn. It made a faint metallic clink as I tossed it into the fireplace. Wolfe did not flinch. Sentimentality ill-suits you. I'll live. He set the book down, upright on the armrest. Not all men can. Wilton tried. His letter was not written for protection. No? It was an act of delay. 1 more hour borrowed from the end. I nodded. Didn't buy him much. Wolfe's gaze shifted to the fire. No, but it bought you the last piece. I didn't reply. Not right away. The shadows along the window blinds had grown longer. The office was still except for the low rattle of the radiator behind Fritz's orchids. Finally I said, she didn't love him. That's not a crime. But it's not nothing. No, not nothing. Pamela hadn't confessed. She hadn't denied either. Wolfe had laid the logic down. Claudia's deception, the swapped casing, the timepiece that never ticked again, the ledgers Wilton tried to forget, and the one stamped letter he hadn't the nerve to destroy. She'd listened to it all, silent. When she stood to go, Wolfe didn't stop her. Neither did I. Wolfe cleared his throat. Have you considered your report? It's on the machine. Is it tolerable? Readable, maybe even printable. He reached for his beer, cold in a polished glass, the way Fritz liked it served when he deemed Wolfe's mood compatible. Wolfe sipped. There is a danger in cases that end with truths instead of justice. Danger? For the conscience, yours, if not mine. I rolled the chair back a half-inch. The squeak in the wheel reminded me I still hadn't oiled it. Do you want the final copy? No. Want me to file the gear? He glanced at the fire. You already have. I folded my arms. Well then. Well then, Wolfe echoed. There wasn't anything else to be said. No triumphant ending, no ribbon-tied resolutions, just quiet, and the mild smell of beer, and a small brown envelope in a drawer I'd probably open again some day, though I'd tell myself it was by accident. I looked once more toward the hearth. In the end, I said, no one vanished. Wolfe raised an eyebrow. They just ran out of time.